Hello everyone. Welcome to our session on our new project, Power Allotments Devon. It's lovely to see you all here. Thank you for taking the time out of your Tuesday afternoon. We really appreciate it. Just for starters, if you're willing and able, please do put your name and if you're affiliated with any organisation on your name. So you can do that by on the 3 dots on the top right of your picture, and you can press rename. And also maybe just get to know each other a little bit. So if you can put your name and where you're from, what parish you're from in the chat function.
In the middle.
And just another couple of quick housekeeping things. If you're all able to stay on mute, if you're not talking, we will have time throughout the session for questions and Q&A at the end as well. So don't worry, you will get a chance to ask all your burning questions throughout the session. And during the session as well, if you have any thoughts, if you want to say anything to any of your fellow guests on the call, feel free to use the chat function as well and drop that in. So for all of you who are coming in, welcome. Thank you for taking the time today to come to our launch event of Power Allotments Devon. If you're able to maybe just get to know each other in the chat, so write down a hi, your name and which parish you're calling from today, that would be amazing, and we can kind of get to know who's interested at the moment. So George, if you can just put up the agenda, that'll be awesome. So for today, we're going to go through some bits. So for starters, hi, my name is Prina. I'm a local energy coordinator at Regen. And if you don't already know, Regen is a not-for-profit centre of energy expertise based in Exeter. And our whole mission is to decarbonise the energy system. And we want to do that in a just way, which is why we're here today. And we'll be talking about why we think this project is going to be really helpful for Devon and its local communities. So at 5 past, in just a couple of minutes, we've got Al talking about the project itself, and she'll be introducing herself in just a sec. And we'll also hear from Jake from Communities for Renewables. At 2:20, we'll hear from Alison McPherson from Plymouth Energy Community, and they'll be talking about a particular project they've got at the moment that's really exciting. And at 5:30, we'll be hearing from Guy about why biodiversity is so important and how we can include that as well within our projects. So just a little bit of background, Devon County Council has, as part of their climate emergency declaration, committed to reducing their carbon emissions by 2050 at the latest, and also improving local environment and resilience of local communities. And we really hope that we can contribute to that goal with this project. And so I'm going to now pass on to Al, who's going to talk you through a little bit about the project. But again, please do stay active in the chat, talk to each other, ask any questions that you have, but we'll also have that Q&A session at 2:40, as you can see in the agenda as well. So I'll pass over to Al now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Prina. Okay, hi. So my name is Als Parker, and I work for the Devon Energy Collective. The Devon Energy Collective is a not-for-profit community interest company, and we were set up in 2020 to help Devon meet its carbon net zero targets. Now, our aim is to see more community-owned generation in Devon, and we want to see communities benefit from the low carbon transition. We teamed up with Regen for this project, where Prina works along with George and Shona, who are on the call. We were given some funding to run this project from Devon County Council, from their Community Energy Fund, which was set up to strengthen the community energy sector in Devon. So in May 2019, Devon County Council declared a climate emergency with an aim to become carbon neutral by 2050. And now, with the current energy crisis, more and more households will become fuel poor this winter in Devon. I think 1 in 4 Devon households currently live in fuel poverty and find themselves in situations where they can't afford to heat their home. And to address both of these very serious issues, we think that Devon could generate a significant share of its energy needs using its own sun, wind, potentially water resources. And so that's why we've set up this project, because there's a significant opportunity here for the renewable energy to be owned by local communities and run for the benefit of local communities, which would create green jobs and use a surplus income from the sale of electricity to make homes more energy efficient, to spend on rewilding and tree planting, and to protect communities most at risk of the impacts of climate change. There are a lot of challenges to developing community energy, renewable energy projects at the moment, we've come up with the Power Allotments project because we think that there might be, this might be an area where we could really make a difference. So the Power Allotments project, which we're now launching, so we're talking to you all today as our kind of key stakeholders in Devon, and we're asking you to spread the word of this project if you like the look of it, and tell your networks. We want to spread this across Devon and tell everybody in every parish about it. The idea is we want every parish in Devon to have a look and see whether they can identify 5 acres of land for a community-owned solar plant. Mainly this project is focused on solar. If a community thinks that they really have got a fantastic site for a large wind turbine, and we're talking a commercial scale turbine that's well away from houses, we would be interested to hear from them. But our focus is on solar, where we think with a 5 acre project, we will be able to potentially connect these into the grid and generate a good amount of power in every parish. So these sites need to be tucked away from homes and footpaths. They need to be unshaded. Ideally, they would gently face south. They could be shielded behind hedges, perhaps next to a road, a railway line, and a sewage treatment plant behind the hedge. 5 acres of land that's a lower amenity value area, and that's an opportunity for small community-owned solar fields to generate a local income. So that's our assignment for the Power Allotments project. Next slide, please, George. So to do this, we have generated an interactive map. So we've put together a toolkit. This is just about to go live on our website. If it hasn't already today, it will go live in the next day or two. The toolkit consists of an interactive map, a handbook, and a site submission form. The handbook talks communities through how to identify a site, and the interactive map has been put together to show where we think the easier low-hanging fruit sites could be. So those are sites that are close to the grid connection points in Devon. So anywhere that's further than 2 kilometres in Devon from a grid connection point has been blacked out or greyed out, so you can't choose those sites. It also excludes anywhere in a built-up area and any higher value agricultural land, which is grade 1 or 2 land. So this map here, you can get a little snapshot of what it looks like. You can see that most of the national parks are completely blanked out because they're such a long way from a grid connection, and the urban areas are also blanked out. But there is still a lot of land and a lot of parishes that fit on that map where we could potentially find a power allotment site. We've tried to keep it open-minded. Normally a developer would potentially not even go near an area of outstanding natural beauty, but we've kept them in because we want communities and people within parishes to think about whether there is a site, even if it is in an AONB, area of outstanding natural beauty, that might still be suitable because it's tucked away and nobody can see it. Next slide, please, George. So we've developed a handbook, and this will be online as well, and this will help people who want to be part of this project and identify a site. It will help them go through and identify a site. In an ideal world, all of these sites would come from communities, so community groups, community action groups, parish councils, green groups, existing groups that are set up within the community, but they could come from individuals. But what we want to do is we want people to get together and agree where they think a site might work in their community. So the handbook will take you through the guide and through how people actually submit sites. So next slide, please. So the proposition is that all sites will be submitted on an online sort of data collection form. It's not very arduous and it will take only 5 minutes to complete. And then we have, as part of this project, we've employed Shona, who's going to wave at you now. Yay, thanks, Shona. Oh, she's put a lovely picture of a Scottish lockup. So Shona is going to go through all of the sites and run them through her mapping system, and then feedback on the good sites and aim to be back in touch within 6 weeks. And the ambition is that the very best of these sites can then be developed as community-owned assets. Now, the Devon Energy Collective could develop these sites and act as the developer, or the community group itself, or a new community group in the area could develop the site. So we don't mind who develops the sites, we just want to see good sites built and retaining the benefit in Devon. The idea is that the landowner receives a fair rent for renting out his fields for solar panels, and then the surplus income goes to the community. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give you an example, and I was racking my brains just before this, before today, thinking, okay, let's think of a landmark in Devon that everybody on this call might know. I just, off the top of my head, thought about the orange elephant on this side of the M5A38 interchange. It's an ice cream orange elephant, if you know it. So I zoomed in on the map, and there you can see what I came up with, which is the fact that the orange elephant is standing in a field. There's a couple of fields there that are about 5 acres in size, actually. So I thought, wow, there's a potential idea. I have no idea about the land at all. But then when I looked into it and Googled it a bit more, I found out that that area is actually has been in planning, and I'm not sure of the status now. It's been recently pulled out of planning, but for a landfill site. So that might not be a suitable site for this project, but it might be. But I guess I just wanted to show you what a site that people might know about might look like on the map. And in my mind, I was thinking it's next to the motorway and it's away from houses, maybe. Not that I've ever been to visit it. Next slide, please. So, so this is the sort of big picture, which is that if every single parish in Devon could host a 5-acre solar farm, which would hold 1 megawatts of power each, my calculations show that we could generate in Devon 450 megawatts of solar electricity, which I think is about enough for 1/5 of all of our household needs in the whole county. So this project could make a significant difference. It could really help with our transition to net zero. Perhaps some parishes won't be suitable, and other parishes might be able to host more than 1 power allotment or a slightly bigger power allotment. So it could make a really big difference if we could all work together in Devon. Next slide, please. So the outcomes of this project are that we want to see, ideally, a whole load of power allotments all over Devon that would be under development. That would be great, but there are some real constraints that we may come across, and one of the big ones is getting sites connected to the grid. So where we can't build power allotments, I'd really like to see a great big list of village scale solar farms that have been chosen by Devon's communities that we can take forward to the grid companies and to government and demonstrate the desire that there is community will for power stations across Devon. And I think that that would be really valuable. We could also, with that list, demonstrate that there's so much more that we can do, and we could look for to further this project and do more community projects going forwards and get more community energy groups going across Devon and developing their own schemes. So I think that this project could have a really good impact for Devon. Next slide, please. The final one from me. Yeah, so we really need you to help us promote the project. On the 27th of September, we've got a project launch, and that's going out to anyone that's interested from the general public over Zoom. And so if there's any way, please talk to us. I've put the project manager Shona's email address here. Please talk to us about ideas and how we could get this message out across to all of your stakeholders across Devon. The website address is here. What we'll do after this call is we will send a flyer out to you as well, which you can then forward on to your contacts about the launch on the 27th of September. And we just really need your help getting this message out if you think it's a good idea for a project. So thank you very much. I'm going to pass on to Jake now. And Jake's going to talk to you a little bit. We can jump that slide for now. That one might come back later. And Jake's going to talk to you a little bit about what the model actually would look like, the commercial model. Thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Els. Afternoon, everyone. That picture there is the Ernsettle solar farm in Plymouth, which Alistair might cover in a minute. Next slide, please. So I'm Jake from Communities Renewables. We are a not-for-profit company based across the border in Cornwall that help communities, public sector bodies and not-for-profits to set up their own local energy enterprises, develop, finance and build community-owned renewable generation, and then in some cases to help run them for the next 30 years, doing all the behind-the-scenes stuff, running the community companies and looking after the solar farms. Next slide, George. So we've been going for 10 years and worked on community energy schemes all over England. And the sorts of projects we've helped to develop and finance range from solar panels on school roofs up to some very large solar farms. The largest one that we manage is some 75 acres of panels. But what they share in common is that they are owned by a local not-for-profit community interest company or cooperative that's set up to serve the local community. It's governed by local volunteer directors, and they're run under a not-for-profit business model. And what that means is the income they generate from the sale of electricity, and in the old days, a feed-in tariff, that income is used to cover the running costs of the solar farm, to cover its finance costs, which for the larger schemes is a combination of bank loans and community investment. For the smaller schemes, that they're all community funded. And any surplus income after operating and finance costs and retaining sufficient reserves in the company is used to support that community company's local purpose, tackling fuel poverty and reinvesting in community-led projects that help that community transition to net zero. We've helped raise some 78 million of capital, 17 million of which was from community investors. And the community solar projects that we've helped to develop are forecast to generate well over 20 million of surplus income over their lifetimes to support projects in their local community. And they're powering the equivalent of 13,500 homes. All sounds great, but if you add up all the community-owned generation in the UK, it is less than 0.5% of the UK's renewable energy capacity. So what we're trying to do here is change that for Devon, and we don't want Devon to be 0.5%. We want Devon to be 50%, whatever. Can we move on? So briefly, what's the difference between a community and a commercial-owned solar farm? Which describes the ownership of a community solar farm, the commercial solar farm, which is the vast majority of them in Devon, are owned by a solar developer, normally not locally based, and the income generated by that solar farm leaves the local economy. And that's the reason I set up Communities Renewables 10 years ago. Is the UK, now has made very good progress in transitioning from centralized fossil fuel generation to decentralized renewable generation, and something like half our power now comes from decentralized renewable generation and a bit of nuclear on the side. But we are largely missing the opportunity to decentralize ownership and economic benefit of that generation. Whilst the technology, physically we're decentralizing, but we're largely repeating the business model under which fossil fuels are owned, and it doesn't need to be that way. The community can't own a nuclear power station or a coal power station, but it can own a solar farm or a wind turbine. Kind of obvious differences with community and commercial ownership. Community is locally governed, and the investment returns from a community project are retained in the local community rather than being drained from the local community to the extent that that investment comes from the local community. But the critical thing is this surplus income. Can we move on? So our role in this is we are helping with the financial feasibility assessment of sites that are identified through the process that Houser describes. We want to try and help develop a local supply model that would enable the local village to buy their power from that solar farm. And that's not easy. I'll come back onto that. And for those projects which go ahead, we'll be involved in procuring construction operation contractors and raising the finance to build them, and if needed, providing ongoing company and asset management. Next slide. So what might a power allotment look like? This is a solar farm that we're working on at the moment up in Somerset with Bath and West Community Energy, a very well-established community energy enterprise in the Baines area. And it's this one's actually 2 megawatts, so it's slightly larger than the sort of project we're after here. But basically got a field. Some of that field is taken up with solar panels, which will have a fence around them. And Guy will describe the sorts of things which how you can manage land within the solar farm to create a habitat for wildlife. But the point here is if you got a farmer's field and you fill half of it with solar panels, the rest of that field probably isn't much use to the farmer. So what Bath and West did with this project is they've leased the whole field. Half of it is a solar farm, but the other half is being turned into a community orchard and nature reserve. So the local amenity isn't just a solar farm, it's the land around it, and that becoming a new space for the local community to use. Next slide. What might it look like in kind of economic terms? 5 acres, 1 medium-sized field. Maybe that's a largish Devon field. Installed capacity of 1.2 megawatts, generating something like 1.2 million kilowatt hours a year of electricity, which, using the government's average of 2,900 kilowatt hours per year, is about 400 homes. That average is probably too low for Devon. Most Devon homes would use quite a lot more than that. Build cost 1.3 million. Solar, like everything else, is commodity prices. Build prices are volatile and high at the moment. It probably costs a bit more to build a solar farm of that scale at the moment, but we're hoping prices will come down over the next 12 to 18 months, but in the time frame of these projects coming to realization. Probably funded 100% with community share or bond investment, and those community investors being paid interest at 4, 5, possibly 6% per year, with their capital repaid over 20 years. And the solar farm would probably generate something of around £5,000 per year surplus income to support projects in the local village. Next slide. The key challenge is we've got to find the land, the right sort of land, and an interested landowner. And the proposal to the landowner in terms of rent is similar to what they would get from a commercial developer, but there's probably a bit more work in selling them the story. If they see a big solar company come up with a massive come up to them with a big checkbook, and they've delivered projects all over the country, it's very convincing. What we need to sell to that landowner is that the benefit to them is very similar, but this could be an asset for the local community. Once you've got everything in place required to build a solar farm, so land, planning, a viable grid connection, it's actually, I'm not saying it's straightforward, but raising the finance to build it is a process. But we haven't failed yet in raising the finance to build a construction-ready solar farm. The challenge is the risk investment it takes to get these things through the planning and development process. And it can be £100,000 to £200,000 of risk investment for a project of this scale to get it through the planning process, cover all the legal costs, secure the grid connection, and cover the upfront costs of raising the finance. We don't have all that money yet, but what we do have is the funding to put together this portfolio of sites and then show that there is demand, and then that we can use that to make a case for raising further development investment. Planning for a well-chosen and developed solar farm site is actually relatively straightforward, but we can speed up that planning process and ease the process if the community's been involved from the outset, and we can show that, that the community wants it from the outset. Grid is probably the biggest challenge, and one of the reasons we're looking for smaller scale sites is that the grid infrastructure across the country, but particularly in the southwest, is way behind where it needs to be for us to achieve net zero. We kind of reach saturation points, and we need to invest a lot more money in the grid to go from where we are now, with 50% of our electricity coming from renewables and nuclear, to finish the job and do the other 50%. And most wind and solar farms in development at the moment are stuck in queues waiting for the grid to be upgraded. And one of the reasons we're going for smaller sites is we are hoping that by looking at smaller sites, we can find pockets of space in the local 11,000 volt network. So that's three wires on wooden poles, where the grid infrastructure can take the output from what, in the grand scheme of things, are very small projects. Local supply, the obvious thing that people want from a community-owned solar farm is cheap electricity. That's always been the case, but it's particularly the case now. It isn't that straightforward. But again, we want to be able to demonstrate that there's demand for these projects, and that communities want to buy local, they want to buy their electricity at a reduced cost from their own local solar projects. And we want to use that evidence to push for change from government where required, but also pull together the supply partners that we need to create a model where the community could buy power from their own solar farm. And lastly, policy changes. There is going to be a lot of change to the energy sector over the coming months as the government responds to the energy crisis. Some of that may be helpful, some of it may not be helpful. So one of the helpful things that could emerge is the government reintroduce some kind of long-term price certainty for solar. And depending on what that rate is, that actually could be very helpful to make these projects fundable. On the other hand, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak both alluded to in their manifestos that they didn't want to see solar on what they called high value agricultural land. And that could go two ways. It could be that they just say no more solar on agricultural land, which is what they did with wind power in 2015. Or they could say no solar on grade 1 or 2 land, high value land, but we don't want solar on grade 1 or 2 land anyway. That's one of our primary screening criteria is to ensure that the land is grade 3 or lower.
I'm just going to have to push you on. Sorry, Jake.
Yeah, I'm done.
We've got. Okay, brilliant. We can pick up any questions that you have in the Q&A as well. So just keep sending them through. It's really great to see the chat so active as well. So thank you all. I'm just going to move on quickly to Alistair now from Plymouth Energy Community. Yeah, off you go. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alistair McPherson from Plymouth Energy Community. I'm the Chief Exec, lead the team at Plymouth Energy Community, and I volunteer as well as a director for Devon Energy Collective behind this project. Next slide, please. So I think I'm here today, well, I know I'm here today to say, this stuff is possible, and we're an example that it is possible. So PEC is an established community energy organisation. We kicked off in 2013. We're now grown to an organisation with collective turnover of about 1.5 to 2 million over the last few years, with a staff cohort of 23, 24 people. So we're doing this stuff. It's real, and we have generated significant locally owned community energy in our area, and we're making a substantive contribution to the local kind of decarbonisation of our grid. We've got a broader mission that's kind of set out there, which is about like two things. Next slide, please, George. largely it's about building community wealth through renewable energy installations like this, but also helping people at a kind of grassroots level with their energy journey and the challenges that may present. They are very real at the moment, those challenges, and they're more real than they have been for a long time, ever. Some would say, yeah, ever, definitely. But the fuel poverty and the issues associated with decarbonising our homes isn't a new thing, and we've been tackling it for some period of time, and it will be an ongoing thing for us to do. Using revenues from local generated power to support that transition was our business plan on a page when we set up in 2013. And in a world where that was more a regular way that things was done, the kind of talk around windfall tax, shall we have one, shall we won't, wouldn't be a debate, because revenues from our generation create surpluses that are fueled straight back, funneled is the word, straight back into our work locally. Next slide, please. So we're an impact organisation, and that effectively means that we're focused as a charity and a social enterprise to deliver support to households, to decarbonise our economy, to generate more green power, to improve the fabric of fuel poor households, to engage residents with that stuff, and those kind of metrics there tell that story. We've done a lot of that on the back of work we've done to generate locally owned renewable energy power allotments, as they're being talked about here. So next slide, please. And a lot of that does talk about this idea of community owned. And Jake's talked already around what this means, but just to express it in my own words, that means energy projects that are not the normal way of developing and owning energy projects. They are locally developed. They are locally controlled, locally owned, with the profits being retained locally and funneled back into those activities that the community determine are the priorities. So by doing this, we maximise the local economic benefits of the investment in that solar infrastructure. That investment is coming. Again, we've already had significant investment in renewable energy across our country, but we are not seeing normally those benefits held locally. So we want to do that. And our model is to get those kind of surpluses reinvested back into further projects that tackle fuel poverty and climate change. And crucially, we also provide an opportunity for local people to invest so they can take a stake in our kind of social enterprise that runs them. So that's what we mean when we say community-owned renewables. We've done a bit of this, so next slide, please. And so, yeah, we've installed rooftop solar installations. We did that in 2014 and 2015. We've got 32 sites up and running, and we've got a lot of interest to build out new sites now. Next slide, please, George. In 2016, with support from Jake and the team at Community for Renewables and others, we turned this site in the northwest of the city into an Settle Community Solar Farm. It was an area of land that was largely redundant, was kind of challenged to bring forward any kind of economic use for in other ways. It was owned and in control of a local community economic development trust, and we work with them through the process to develop this site, and it's now operational, has been successfully operational since 2016, with community ownership at its heart, and with as I described at the beginning, those surpluses from our business of selling power from this site go straight back into our work in terms of supporting people right now with the cost of living crisis. Those surpluses last year were about £65,000 from this site to fund more advice work in our community. So that was a very real expression of how we could make this work. And we have currently got a live project at Chelson Meadow, which is a solar farm on the north and the east of the city. Next slide, please, George. Which is where we are developing a site. So for those who know Plymouth, on the east bank of the Plym, there is the old city dump, for want of a better word. So it's an old landfill site. It's now capped. It's a closed landfill site. And we wanted to use part of that to bring forward a solar farm. So this is a 13 megawatt solar farm. So it's quite big in comparison to some of the projects that we're talking about here today. But the concept is the same. we as a local organisation are working with local stakeholders here, largely the council, to bring forward a solar farm on this site that will, can the next slide please, be a local flagship for action on the climate emergency. It will deliver chunks of a significant chunk of new green power for our city, generate £50,000 per annum of surpluses back into other community projects locally, and crucially, we hope to take a major step in decarbonising the council's own green power, or decarbonising the council's own carbon power footprint, and by supplying them direct with the power. So all that, plus providing a massive opportunity to talk to people about solar energy, to bring forward wildlife benefits and net gains in biodiversity on the site. So this is not a pipe dream. We're not building it yet, but we're planning to build it next summer. We got planning approval for that this summer. And so if we go to the next slide, you'll see the kind of planning layout for that. So those are a number of quick examples of what's happening in Plymouth, what we're doing in Plymouth. This is stuff that can happen. I mean, if communities come together, you can own and generate your own power, and you can make a go of making that an enterprise. And I hope that you will take these opportunities. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Alistair. That's really interesting and very inspiring as well. Cool. Next up, we'll go to Guy.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Guy Parker. I'm Director of Witchwood Biodiversity. We advise land managers and owners on managing their land better for biodiversity. The majority of our work is with renewables, and especially solar. And we've got quite specialised at fitting wildlife habitats around solar farms over the course of the past 10 years or so. I think we're fairly unique in that we work at the whole project cycle. So we help with planning and developing biodiversity plans for sites, but then also work on the habitat creation and long-term monitoring and management too. We like to be involved for long-term really to see how things pan out. If I could have the next slide, please. So power allotments, as Jake and Alistair have already said, they have a great opportunity for biodiversity on top of the zero carbon energy production. Under the Environment Act, which is worked its way through government, and we're now looking at secondary legislation in the autumn, all new developments are going to need 10% biodiversity net gain. But I think power allotments have the ability to blow those stats out of the water and to do much better than that in terms of their biodiversity gains. You'll see a map here, an annotated map. It's important to have a plan, I think, with all solar when you're looking at biodiversity management. Really put simply, it comes down to working out what habitats or species you have a value to start with that you can protect and take along with you. And then look at what new opportunities there are for each site. I mean, this could be something general like creating some pollinator habitat for butterflies to feed on, or it could be something more specialist, like a good example in South Devon is the Searle bunting, which is a bird whose range in the UK is extremely limited, and its stronghold is in South Devon. So you can actually encourage particular protected species on sites if that opportunity is there. We love maps. I think it's the best thing to identify what you want to do with your site, and it's a great way of conveying the value of that site to the wider people. Everyone can follow it. Next slide, please. So what does a biodiverse solar farm look like? Well, the power allotments are going to be fairly small in size in terms of being 4 to 5 acres. So space is going to be at a premium, but we can learn from what's worked on smaller commercial sites as well as community-owned solar farms, which tend to be smaller anyway. There are lots of options. You can have low-growing wildflowers actually beneath the solar panels, such as in this left-hand photo. You can have patches of wildflowers in the sort of way leaves or edges of the site. You can have tussock grassland around the margins of the site, like big field margins, which is great for birds and insects through the winter. You can create a seasonal wetland in that sort of damp edge of the field that nobody knows what to do with. And that just involves a mini digger, really. You can plant small areas of scrub. You can perhaps plant wild bird seed mixes, which help feed our wintering birds as well. The best results really come from a range of options. So then you're catering for a wide range of species and habitats. Next slide, please. You can also get quite innovative. This is a planting of ferns, which is very young, but beneath the solar panels where it tends to be quite wet and cool and out of direct sunlight. And of course, there are things like on the right, this rather handsome bug hotel that a community built on a solar farm in Essex. So there's a lot of additional things that can be done on top of those habitats that one can create. Next slide, please. Habitat management is important. All wildlife habitats require suitable management in order to make sure they flourish for the whole life of the project. And we're talking sort of 25 to 40 years, I guess, in the case of solar. It doesn't have to be onerous. Usually wildlife prefers a lighter touch. It's really about doing things at the right time. So if we take the example of a wildflower meadow within a solar farm, really it's about leaving it through April to August and then cutting it at the end of the summer. So larger areas can use a little mini tractor like this, or next slide, please. Or you can strim, or even if you have community members with the requisite skills, you can get your scythes out and you can cut the wildflower area and rake. It's simple at this scale, really, to manage wildlife habitats. That's what I'd like to say. Sheep are great grassland managers, of course, and if there are flocks locally, that's a great option for managing the grassland. But of course, this has to be balanced with wildflowers, and there are certain times of the year, like April to August, where you just have to make sure the stocking density is low. I think for community-owned sites, the real benefit is that there's always the possibility of getting working parties involved. So there's usually some useful skill sets amongst the local population. So you can gather community members to plant orchards, to manage orchards, to sow wildflower meadows, even to dig out weeds, which is perhaps at the less attractive end of the market. And so I think, you know, the power allotment, the management piece is really going to be fairly straightforward, and I think this model really lends itself to managing small areas of wildlife habitat. Next slide, please. This is my last. Sorry, I know time is short. On monitoring, we need to know that any habitats that we're investing in are establishing well, and that our desirable plants are doing well, and the undesirable ones are not doing well. It's important to really understand whether and how wildlife is responding to the site and how things are changing over time. Hopefully we're starting to see things improve as the years go on. This information is useful for land managers, but also investors in the site and community members alike. Monitoring doesn't have to be complex. You can just focus in on key target indicators, things like pollinators, like this butterfly or breeding birds. And this really lends itself to citizen science. Again, if there are people with good skills within the community, then they would be ideal for helping monitor the site too. Talking of agriculture, I think any solar farm that's incorporating wildlife habitats will also be benefiting the soil by resting it. There'll be carbon taken down from the atmosphere and stored in the soil. There'll be increased pollination. There'll be wild bird populations will perhaps increase and then help pick crop pests from the surrounding land. These things are quite hard to measure, but these are the broader benefits to society that come from good land management. And it's possible to link up with universities and other research bodies to help us understand how these small power allotments can also help to contribute to agriculture as well as biodiversity. I think the bottom line is power allotments, as well as producing zero carbon power, can help us tackle the biodiversity crisis across Devon and also help to deliver these wider environmental benefits to society.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. That's really interesting. Thank you all. Thank you to all the speakers who've spoken so far. I think we can take the slides down now so we can all kind of have a look at each other. So I guess the main message that we're saying here at the moment is thank you all for your support and questions in the chat. Does anyone have any questions that they've come up that they want to put specifically to the speakers? If so, you can just raise your hand on the Zoom function. Can't see all of you, so I won't be able to see physical hands because there's quite a few of you, which is great. If not, that's no worries. Just as a reminder, we're going to be sending up a follow-up email after this, and that will include the slides, that will include, oh, Alf, I'll go to you.
I did see another hand, actually. I think I saw a hand from Claire below. So maybe Claire first and then me.
Yes, Claire, go for it.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so in Ashburton, I would like to do an energy event to engage in conversation with our community, ask if there's any landowners, blah, blah, blah. I can't do it on my own. And I wondered if there's anybody that I could pull in to do any presentations to help us with this, really.
Al, do you want to answer that?
Great question. Well, we're working on this project. We've got a project manager that is working full time on it and has just put her hand up actually. Depending, obviously we can't go out and do presentations to every single parish, but what we could do is look at putting something together that could go out if there were lots of areas that wanted us, or we could just on an ad hoc basis come and present at some in Ashburton at your energy event. So it sort of depends on what happens next, or whether it's better that we just try to put some sort of pack together so that we can help you. So I think we just need to keep that conversation going. So can we talk on email going forwards? And it would be really nice to be able to support you. Fantastic. Thank you, Claire, that you're looking at putting an energy event on. And yeah, we'd love to be able to support you one way or another.
Yeah, exactly. And so if you do have any queries like that, please do send them in and we'll figure out something at least to support you. Fuad and Helen?
Yes, just to say, following on from that, Action on Climate in Teambridge, which operates within Teambridge, which I'm sure you know about, is running a series of energy roadshows. And I think adding this initiative to that would be quite easy. We're running another one next week, so we've got quite a few organized. So if anybody within Teambridge is interested in getting information on this project, as well as broader energy related information, just contact us.
Brilliant, thank you.
I think the Teambridge area does have quite a lot of land that may have good capacity, not good capacity in general, but good availability for this project. So the map that we've got, I think there's quite a lot that's not blocked out in Teambridge.
Can I just also say that within Teambridge, the district council has actually published a very similar resource map for both solar and wind. And we have also done an analysis of wind sites. So we're quite keen on some of the wind sites. So that's another area we would be putting in as well.
Brilliant. It's really good to see Teambridge being so proactive.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Andy?
Hi. Yeah. So a couple of questions, I guess. One is what I'm gathering from here is first to put land forward, we need to be clear up front that the landowner is in agreement. I'd just like to check that that's right. And then the other question is, what's the time scale for all this? You know, I gather we're opening soon. When are you going to start assessing the sites and starting to make decisions?
Andy, I'll take this one. Thank you. So in terms of the landowner, I, as a commercial developer, which I once was and have been in the past, I haven't had many, I've never really had trouble with getting a landowner to be interested in a site because it brings an income to them. So really, I sort of want to do this project the other way around and see if the communities can come up with sites, and then it could be from the landowner, but then we'll talk to the landowner, and many landowners will be interested because there's an incentive in it for them. Or that's my view. In terms of timescales, yes, we're opening the submission form now and going out on the 27th to launch to the general public. Our project manager will be looking at everything and trying to respond within 6 weeks. And really by next March, we hope to have a whole pipeline of projects. The ones in the top, we will be going out and speaking to landowners and sharing heads of terms with them. So that's where we want to be in terms of timescales. We want to have a bunch of projects by the spring next year that we can take forward into development.
Great. Paul? You're on mute, Paul.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's a little bit like the previous question. I mean, I've I live in Loddeswell, just north of Kingsbridge. I have spoken briefly to Al's before about that. I guess my query is, how do we really get clear about whether it's feasible from a connection to the grid point of view before we set a whole lot of hairs running in the community with the landowner and everything else? It just seems a bit, you know, it's not just chicken and egg, it's chicken and egg and something else as well. and, you know, which of those three things do you pursue first, I guess, is the query. I know you talked about a map earlier, and that may help, but obviously I haven't got into the detail of that to see how it would work out.
It's a brilliant question, Paul. Yes, I mean, we all know that the grid in the southwest is absolutely chock-a-block. But what we're hoping is that sites at this scale will not necessarily be subject to curtailment, which means they won't necessarily have to shut down on a sunny day at midday, because they will fall within the the 1 megawatt capacity. What we're also hoping is to take all of these sites that we come up with to WPD. I think we've got Faithful here. Hi, Faithful. We want to take them a list. Right. We want to sit down with the network planners and say, look, this is what we want to do. And we sort of got to start somewhere, because otherwise we're sort of, it's becoming so hard to find somewhere that we can connect a project. But what the map does is it does say if you're too far away from the network. So, for example, where I live down in Bigbury, we're too far from the network down here, so the whole map is greyed out, because unfortunately we're out of area.
Right. Yeah.
That's a really good question, though. Thank you, Paul. Julian.
Hi. I look after the website for Action on Climate in Teambridge, which I think Phil had mentioned earlier on, and I was wondering if there was any material I could use sort of that was ready written to put in a post on the website, and also is it okay yet to advertise put a link to the 27th event in the events section on our website?
Yes, it most certainly is okay, and please do. Thank you very much for that. So George and Shona have both put in the chat the website link and all of the materials that we've mentioned today, so the map, the toolkit, and also a poster that Shona's done will all be available as well. So we'll be sending that in the follow-up email, so don't worry, you don't have to jot it down now, but yes.
Okay, thank you.
Hayden?
Thank you. Storage. I'm wondering if storage is featuring. So if we're going to spend 1.3 million on a solar farm, could there be storage capability within that development? And I'm also very interested in peer-to-peer selling of electricity.
Jake, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, thank you.
Good question. So storage is something that we will look at in the financial feasibility assessment. We've done that a couple of times recently with independent battery consultants, and they've concluded that storage on these sorts of solar farms isn't economically viable. But the energy market is changing so much that may change, and that's just looking at it from the perspective of a battery sharing the connection with the solar farm and using that battery to provide grid services, the sort of services the grid needs to manage variable generation. The other potential benefit for storage is if it helps manage a grid constraints and therefore reduces the cost of connecting to the network. So there's kind of two ways we look at it. And if it would cost £300,000 to connect to the network, but spending, I wish the numbers were like this, but spending £200,000 on a battery would take away the problem, then that might be worth looking at. Unfortunately, it's not £200,000 on a battery, it's a lot more. The other question was on peer-to-peer, and that's exactly the sort of thing we're trying to get into place on the local supply. What we really want is for the village to be able to directly purchase their power from their village solar farm via some kind of peer-to-peer platform or arrangement with a partner supplier. But for various reasons we haven't got time to go into, it isn't that easy to do.
Well, I'd love to see it brought about. It'd be great to bring that about, wouldn't it? Let's work on that. Thank you.
Isn't there a local supply bill? Is an interesting kind of proponent of that at the moment. Chris.
Yeah, hi guys. Yeah, that was actually one of the reasons that I mentioned load balancing companies like Grid Beyond, who get paid a fortune on an annual basis to control the flow of energy onto the grid. It's been a couple of years since I've had a conversation with them, but we were talking at the time about using them to supply community battery technology so that you could effectively have a number of connections to a communal battery that then took away some of the issues that you have with regards to using a direct grid connection to distribute your energy supply. So I think that they would be a really good place to start looking, because that way, if it's a way of saving money in terms of getting energy storage where you've not got sufficient grid infrastructure, I can guarantee you that even though we're talking about significant chunks of money for the battery technology, you're probably talking about even more significant figures for the grid infrastructure, especially if you're talking about somewhere like Bigbury, for example. So yeah, that was one of the main reasons why I was mentioning about trying to get in touch with the load balancing companies. I think that would be a really good place to explore. The other thing which I mentioned in chat while Guy was talking, so I'm South Hams and West Devon District Councils, and in our UK Shared Prosperity Fund investment plans, one of our biggest focuses is around decarbonisation activities. And we've got some significant projects around regenerative farming. So I was really interested in what Guy was saying around combining sort of biodiversity improvements and but still being able to use the land underneath for useful purposes and what have you. And it feels like the project could tie really neatly with some of the activities that we're looking at rolling out around regenerative farming. So if we're talking to sort of 100 to 200 farmers over the next couple of years around moving towards regenerative farming processes, then combining that with localized generation at the same time in a way that isn't going to be detrimental to certain crops or produce, then that would be a really interesting thing for me. So I'd really like to link up outside of this and have a conversation about how we can combine those project ideas. So we're talking about putting some significant money towards that through our UK SPF investment plan, and local authorities outside of Plymouth will also have just received last weekend about an additional pot of funding for rural top-up being made available to us. And again, that fund is 100% capital fund, and we're looking at using the lion's share of that money that's been allocated to South Hams and West Devon for decarbonisation activities. Through renewable generation and sustainable activities. So really keen to link up.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, we'll definitely take that offline. Thank you so much for your input.
I'll drop you a line, Chris, and I'll coordinate Guy in as well. Yeah, definitely. That sounds really interesting. Okay, well, we've come to the end of our time, so I just want to say a huge thank you again for all coming. Obviously, we've just started this project, so any feedback is always welcome. So please do drop us a line if you have any questions that come up. As Al said in the chat, any questions that we missed, we will be responding to, and we'll do our very best to get back to any of you that asked a question. We'll also be sending out the slides, the information pack, all the links that we mentioned to the website and to the maps that you can share with your networks, as well as the link to our event on the 27th of September, which is very exciting. So yeah, thank you again all for coming. Please do spread the word and get in touch with us if you have any questions or anything at all. Alice, do you want anything to say last? No, I just want to say thank you so much for coming. Thanks for your time. And please, if you can help us and have ideas on how to help us, drop us a line. We try and get this information across Devon. Brilliant. Thank you all very much. Have a lovely afternoon. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.